All right, good evening, everyone. We are thrilled to have you here for our first virtual standing committee meeting. We have a full house, so that's great. We appreciate your flexibility and willingness to meet into the evening hours. I'm going to pitch it quickly to John, who has a bit of a housekeeping item for you, and then we'll jump into the agenda.
Thank you so much, Meredith. So great to see all of you again. If there are new faces, great to meet you for the first time. A quick request. So you'll notice, and I think a couple of folks have already done this. Lillian, myself, and Meredith all have who we are representing here. And thank you also to those who just kind of have it naturally set up. If you are not necessarily here representing a specific organization, and you'd be willing to just take a moment to, if you click on those three little dots above on the right side of your picture, you can rename yourself and just add what would be the stakeholder group that you feel like you are most representative of here tonight. We're going to be doing some splitting out into breakout rooms later, and I'm going to try to do my best to balance so we have a good spread of different folks who have different perspectives in the group. So that would be incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, John. So if you need any help with that task, let us know. You should be able to rename even if you're on the web app as well. So I think that Zoom gives you that function. If not, put something in the chat and we'll help you figure that out. Looks like people are adding that. Perfect. So the first item that we had was sort of approval of minutes, but we're going to do our minutes a little bit differently for this committee. So Caleb very kindly offered to write the summary of our first meeting that we had in November. If you have not heard, we are planning to have a full council newsletter that will be developed and produced by the department and pushed out to all the Cool Council members and the community at large. And part of that will be a summary of the work of the different standing committees. And so Caleb wrote the first summary of the meeting, and we've passed that along to our comms team. But we do need a volunteer who would be willing to write the summary of today's meeting. So that would involve being a very active listener and taking notes and being able to kind of reflect on the topics that were discussed and sort of any action items that might emerge from today. It's not terribly long. It would be something that could be consumable to anyone who happens to come across it. So we don't have to have a lot of detail necessarily in the summary, but we want to be sure that we're capturing the work that is taking place. So would anyone be willing to serve as that note taker reflector today? Caleb, do you want to tell them how painless it actually is?
Yes, so it wasn't too involved. I kind of went off what I had the notes I had taken from our meeting in November, and didn't take too long to write the summary. And I would recommend the opportunity to anybody. It was pretty painless.
Thanks, Caleb. That worked. Jessica said she would. You've convinced her. Thank you, Jessica. We appreciate it. So if you want to take notes, they'll just be for your own memory so that when it is time to write the summary, you can look back on those notes. So we appreciate that, Jessica, very much.
All right. And I'll add, I'm sorry to interrupt, Meredith. I'll add that I can go ahead and email Jessica the last copy. That way she'll have that to kind of go off.
Awesome. That is super helpful. Thank you, Caleb. We appreciate you being the first summary writer. You did a great job. All right. So the next item we have is to select our chair and vice chair. So I sent an email out prior to, well, it may have been the start of 2023. Time is a bit of a blur at the moment. Kind of outlining the process that we're proposing for the leadership roles within the standing committee. So one of our partner committees came up with this sort of succession plan for leadership, and we thought that that was something that we should replicate. So what we've proposed is that we'll have an interim chair, and then we'll also have a vice chair. And they will have some joint responsibilities, including meeting with John, Lillian, and myself to develop the content for our standing committee meetings. And then the chair will also come to a once monthly meeting with the rest of the Cool Council. And this is something that came out of our November meeting, an interest from all of the committee members to be sure that we were staying connected to the work of the groups that we are not directly taking part in. So that meeting will occur at the end of the month. We asked for people to volunteer, and we actually had 2 volunteers, one for chair and one for vice chair. So that worked out very well. So I'm pleased to share that Caleb put in his name for chair and Bentley for vice chair. So I'm going to give them a couple minutes to just provide a brief introduction, and then we are going to go ahead and complete the ballot that I referenced in my email so that we can officially document that this vote took place. But we have uncontested races, so that's great. So Caleb, if you want to start.
All right. Thank you so much, Meredith. And I know I spoke a few moments ago, but I just want to say, first of all, that it's great to see everyone again. I know it's been a few months and a new year now that we're beginning this work in. My name is Caleb, as Meredith mentioned, and I'm very proud to be a Kentuckian. I've been involved with education work in Kentucky for a few years now. I first became involved more on the politics and policy side. And then as a student advocate, I ventured over into the governance side of the education system. And as chair, I want to work to create an accepting, caring, and open space that is fruitful for dialogue. And I'm guided by a conviction, ensuring every Kentucky student has access to educational opportunities, no matter their identity or geographical location or their socioeconomic status or any other factor. I'm a human. I'll admit that I'll make some mistakes, but I'll hold myself to a high standard, and I'll look forward to learning and growing alongside all of you. I'm excited to bring people together and to craft mutual respect, to find common ground, and to pave a new path forward for folks across our Commonwealth education stakeholders. Thank you all.
Outstanding job, Caleb. That really sounded like a campaign speech. So bonus points. That was excellent. Bentley, you're up.
Hello, my name is Bentley. I am a current junior at the Kentucky School of the Deaf in Danville, Kentucky, which is where I'm at right now. I am a member of our school's student body government. I am the president of our school's FFA chapter. I've been on the Commissioner Student Advisory Council at the Department of Education for the past 2 years, I think, if I can do the math correctly. My brain's been tired all day. And as part of being on the Student Advisory Council, I have been working with the Office of Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman with her student mental health initiative for the past 8 months-ish. So that's about everything, I think. A little bit, I don't know, all over the place. I'm not exactly sure everything I do, but we get there some way or another.
Awesome, Bentley. We are excited that Caleb and Bentley have stepped up to be our inaugural leaders of the standing committee, and we look forward to working with them. So I'm going to go ahead and put the ballot in the chat box now. It should be pretty straightforward. So select one name from each of the potential positions. There'll be only one for you to pick from. It does ask that you submit your name. I indicated in the email that that is just to make sure that we don't have any duplicate submissions, and so that we can make sure that only members are voting. So congratulations, both of you, and we expect great things from you both. So moving on, I did also share with you the proposed charter. That's something we worked on at the end of November in our first convening. And we took quite a lot of notes, and Stacy, our wonderful assistant, typed all of those up so that we were able to reflect on them and incorporate them into the charter. So in the draft charter that I shared, we did have that some revisions captured, and I tried to indicate where changes had been made by striking through original text and adding proposed new text in red. So hopefully everyone had a chance to look at that proposed charter. I'm going to put it in the chat so that you can access that document now. So one of the items that we want to accomplish today is to hopefully get approval on the charter and make any other changes that are proposed. But there's one part of the charter that we really didn't touch on during the meeting that I want to take a minute and make sure that we are really attending to this and are sure that we understand kind of what all is captured there. And who better to walk us through this than our interim chair of the full council, Miss Audrey Gilbert. So I'm going to share my screen, and we have a couple slides. So the section that I am referencing is actually at the very end of the charter, and it's under the section titled Community Agreements. And this is where we're talking about the habits of inclusive design. So I'm going to share my screen, Audrey, and then you can take us through those. Hopefully I can share my screen. Let's see.
And I apologize in advance for any background noise. I'm in a different place than usual today. Right, there's your screen. So
Okay,
there
perfect.
are 4 habits of inclusive design processes. And we talked a little bit about these, I think, as a whole group. If you've been involved with other initiatives at KDE, things like the KCAE, L3 groups, anything like that, we've talked about these in different spaces before, but these are the 4 habits. So you start with inclusion. And really all of these habits should be working together, but we'll start with inclusion. Most people know what inclusion is, but in this space, we're bringing in voices of everybody who's not heard, making sure that we're getting the right people there to inform our decisions, and making sure that they're all there in order to have a chance to speak and say what they feel like saying, and build a sense of belonging among people. So that way, if you're somebody who's not usually invited, you're not just sitting there and you don't feel like you're welcome in the meeting, you're truly a participant and people are actively trying to make you feel welcome. Then you have empathy, which is understanding the views, feelings, and needs of others. This can take place in just recognizing other people's experiences, reaching out to other people, listening to what they have to say about current issues, current experiences, purposefully making an effort to go out and understand what other people are experiencing so that you're not just bringing your own perspective, that you're a well-informed member of this group or any group for that matter. Then you've got co-creation, which is personally my favorite, where it says they're working together to create or implement a solution to a challenge. That's what we're doing. We're all working together to create a solution and implement it to the lovely challenges that we will find. With this, it takes that inclusion piece a little bit further to make sure that everybody's actively working together, that everyone's given an equal space, and that we don't just have 1 or 2 people doing all the work and then we're just putting our check mark on it. Everybody's participating and we're making sure that we're sharing the work together. And then reciprocity, exchanging or sharing power privileges for mutual benefit. So in this setting, that's really going to look like how our work benefits people outside of our group, how we can reciprocate this effort to the state of Kentucky, how we can work with local districts to hear their needs and give back to them what we are able to. And so you play a little bit more on that empathy there to make sure that we're understanding what everybody does need so that we can take what we have learned and what we're able to do in this position of power and share it back with them. So those are the 4 habits. I think I'm passing it back to Meredith.
Awesome. Thanks, Audrey. So those of us who are directly involved in the United We Learn work at KDE have come to know these 4 habits quite extensively. They are embedded into all of the work that we are doing. Our team KDE meetings are actually framed around these 4 habits, and we've all been asked to think about all the work that we do at KDE to think about where we can be more inclusive, be more empathetic, have more reciprocity in the work that we are generating, and to always be thinking about how we could co-create. So with that in mind, I do have a couple questions that I want to pose to the group as we think about the charter. So if we're thinking about that habit of inclusion, so bringing in diverse voices, how could we share the work that is coming out of this committee to result in broader input from stakeholders? Is that something that we've captured in the charter and sort of what we are proposing our work will accomplish, or is there a way that we could be more inclusive?
I have a question. This is Michelle. Do we know who all our stakeholders is? I know they're students, educator, family. So maybe understanding who voters are.
That's a great point. And in the charter, you'll notice that we did, based upon input from the group, change some of the language. We had communities, and we tried to clarify a little bit more who those stakeholder groups would really represent. So students, educators, families, and communities, as you mentioned, but do we feel like we need more detail on that within the mission or in any of the goals?
Meredith, I don't know that we necessarily need more detail. I think we just have to be intentional as we execute, our work to make sure that we're being intentional about bringing those voices to the table.
So a phrase that has come up that I think is very powerful is radical inclusion. And that's something that Dr. Tran, who supports our work from the Center for Innovation and Education, has really emphasized that it's this very purposeful inclusion, right? And that you identify groups that are perhaps not often brought to the table and are not given the same platform. So I totally agree. That's super helpful. So I think we're sort of twofold, thinking kind of bigger picture as we're working through the rest of our meeting today about these 4 habits, but also specifically in the language around the charter where we might want to make any revisions. So let's move on to the next question. So thinking about co-creation, that working together to create and or implement a solution to a challenge, is there a role for others, students, families, local businesses, KDE staff, to help co-create the work of this initiative?
This is Edna Shack. I think there's a place, I know since we're working in the L3, that we're reaching out to our community, and also since I'm on city council, I'm working hopefully to bring those 2 things together. But I think it would be beneficial if the leaders of communities had an understanding of what COOL is and what we are trying to do.
Awesome. And that is a suggestion that will be positively affirmed by Lillian and her team, because we're actually going to be working to address some advocacy concerns. And so that is exactly the type of thing that we're hoping to incorporate into the work of the standing committee. All right, so last question, just quickly, we are almost out of time for this portion of our meeting. When we think about empathy, so understanding the views, feelings, and needs of others, how might we learn about the impact stakeholders hope this work will have? So we know that we had the listening tour, we had the coalition that met, and that was really about all of the affected parties having an opportunity to sort of speak to the work and the direction it was headed. But how do we make sure that we keep that at the forefront and at the center of our work, that we are understanding how those who are directly impacted are feeling about the direction we're moving?
Jenny, I wonder if there needs to be something in those 6-month goals that more explicitly outlines how those stakeholder voices will be involved in those projects.
Absolutely. If you would like to just directly add some thoughts into there, what we can do, Lillian, why don't we wait to vote on the charter until the end of the meeting so that people can kind of be reflecting and adding some additional revisions. And then we'll kind of conclude with a vote, if that is okay with you.
That sounds great. And I don't know if you saw Julie's note in the chat.
I did not.
But yeah, if you wanted to speak to that. This and Jim agrees. This is getting to how we start to get state policymakers involved in this work specifically.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, my understanding of Zoom is so limited that now that I'm sharing, I cannot see the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing. If we were on Teams, I'd be all over it. Okay, let's see. Yeah. So I believe in future meetings, we're going to be talking even more about kind of how we hope to advocate and share this work, but absolutely we do need to be involving kind of, you know, we have sort of two related priorities, but sort of, you know, we want to be inclusive and we want to be sure that we are co-creating with the communities that we talked about and definitely elevating voices, but also acknowledging that we have this other priority to make sure that those decision makers, those with power, are included and are part of the conversation so that when the time comes that we need their support, we have them alongside us. So I will pause here and we'll come back to the charter. So feel free to add notes in. We're going to be multitasking throughout the meeting here, but we're going to pitch it to our friends from KnowledgeWorks for the remainder of our agenda, and then we'll come back together and make sure we get approval on the charter before we conclude.
Awesome. Thanks, Meredith. And Bentley, you teed me up really nicely with your comments. So I appreciate that around the federal government. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time focusing on some of the foundational concepts around school quality, primarily to level set and make sure we all have a common understanding, not only of what we mean when we talk about school quality, but also what the federal government requires us to do, and really begin to frame the work that we're doing here in these national conversations that are emerging around assessment and accountability redesign. Because while everything we're doing here, we are doing for the students in Kentucky, there is significance that this project holds, this work holds to influence the national conversation. So we want to hold that perspective, I think, in our hearts and minds as we do this work. So just to kind of, before we jump into this section, wanted to do just a very quick waterfall chat prompt. So if you haven't done this before, what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give you a prompt and I'm going to want everyone to write something in the chat, but not hit enter until I say go. And then when everyone's ready, I'm going to say go, and it's going to populate in the chat all of your ideas. And then we can take a look and see the themes that are emerging. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of 3 words that come to mind when you think of the quality of your local school. So if you are thinking of your local school, it can be an elementary school, a middle school, a high school in your neighborhood, and you are considering whether that school is of high quality, what are 3 words that would come to mind for you that you would look for to consider whether it is of quality? So give everyone a second to think about that. And you can, when you have it, you can start typing, just don't hit enter yet. This is intended to be fast, so I'm going to give you about 20 more seconds. So go ahead and start typing if you haven't already. Okay. Oh, Edna got a head start. All right, ready? I'm gonna say, go. Go ahead, populate them in. All right. Okay, so I want everyone to take a look and read through those waterfall chats that just populated in. And notice some of the themes that are emerging for you. And go ahead and call out when you start to see themes. Just come off mute and share what you're noticing.
I must say that I notice as I scroll through here that several folks seem dedicated to this idea of engagement with communities, being communicative, being open, and being accountable to public interest.
Wow, that's great. Anyone else want to share what they're noticing?
I feel like one of the overarching things is like authenticity and like building of relationships, just things like that. Progressive education system.
Yeah, that's great. Someone else jumping in there? Yep, Edna, I see that in the chat. Caring comes up several times. Absolutely. So I always like to do this little quick exercise because it's interesting how many of the things that we put in the chat are not measured by our current system, yet we as stakeholders deeply value those. So just want us to hold that in our minds as we think about the work we're going to do here together. How do we create a system that starts to center some of these things that we value so that our stakeholders really have the information they need to determine whether their local school is quality? All right, well, let's jump in. I'm going to do walk us through some foundational pieces, as I mentioned, and then we are going to get into some small groups. So we want to make sure that everybody has time to talk and engage and share some of their reflections on their own experiences with Kentucky's accountability and assessment systems. So Meredith, if you could advance probably 2 slides now at this point, we'll jump into the foundation. So just kind of a quick reminder for those of us, I know we're all pretty closely connected into the system or part of the system. But when we talk about school quality, that's an umbrella term for accountability and assessment systems. Why do we have them? So they are important. They provide things like transparent data on school performance. They help us know when something is either going really well or when something isn't going so well, so that we can learn from the things that are great and so that we can intervene when things aren't going so well. They might help us identify struggling student populations or individuals that really need additional support. And they provide an overall picture for how well the system is doing to prepare students for college and careers. And I think it's important to underscore this piece because so many questions are starting to emerge around the country of why do we even need assessment and accountability systems, right? It's important to remember that they play an important role. Our goal is to make sure that they are useful and responsive to the communities that they're intended to serve. So if you go to the next slide, I also like to really center the different audiences that use this school quality data. So different audiences, they have different needs when they think about school quality data. So parents and community members, they're using data to make decisions about the quality of their local school. So this might be a situation where maybe I'm looking to buy a house and I want to know what neighborhood to move into, and I'm looking for information to tell myself how great the schools are in my local community. Educators, they are using data in different ways to identify challenges and make adjustments to instruction and school culture. So this might be data that educators are using to come together in a collaborative planning period. They might identify that there are particular units within fourth grade mathematics that don't seem to be landing well, and they might come up with an intervention to support those students and address those challenges. And then policymakers, they have a very different need. So they're using data to make decisions about where to target resources and supports. And so this is where you might have a conversation around, say, kindergarten readiness data, and it doesn't look great for the state as a whole. And so maybe that inspires policymakers to invest more in access to pre-K programs, for example. So different audiences, different uses. And our job as a committee is going to be to consider all of those audiences and the different needs that they have, so we aren't creating and designing solutions that don't meet the needs of one of these populations. So if you go to the next slide, we obviously need to talk about the elephant in the room, the federal government. So as Bentley said, wouldn't it be great if they were sitting here on this committee learning from all of you? Well, while they are not going to be serving on this committee with us, unfortunately, we are going to do our job to educate them about the work that is emerging from this. But we also need to understand what they are requiring of states, because that is an important part of this policy conversation. So any state that is receiving federal funding for education services must include 3 components when they design their K-12 system. So first, they have to create a system of standards so that basically articulate what students know and must be able to do at each grade level. They then need to create a system of assessments that they use to measure how well students are meeting those particular standards. And the current law requires testing annually in 3rd through 8th grade and once in high school in math and English language arts, and then in grade span 3 times in science. And then those states also have to build an accountability system. And that is where they are essentially providing public data on school performance to help stakeholders improve school quality. So this is where you see requirements like, a state must post an annual school report card for every school in the state. A state must also identify their lowest performing schools and come up with a set of interventions to help improve those schools. So these are federal requirements that right now we can't change. What we can do is try to design within this space, but hopefully also come up with ideas and solutions that help educate and evolve the federal government to create change that works for Kentucky stakeholders in the long run. So if you go to the next slide, just a quick historical lesson on assessment and accountability. I like to do this quickly for any historians in the group, or those that have lived through all of this and remember painstakingly these moments in time. But it's important to note that this heavy federal presence in education didn't actually emerge until 1994. So some here may remember or have studied it in history books, that it was actually when President George H.W. Bush called all of the governors together in the early 90s to Charlottesville, Virginia, so not too far from my home, and had a conversation about the need to create voluntary national standards. Like, we need to have some sort of, shared expectations for what students need to know. Kentucky was actually one of the states that jumped at that opportunity, right, with passage of the Kentucky Education Reform Act, or the CARE Act, and that was created this system of assessments, these standards, right? So Kentucky was really leading the nation at trying to put a vision out there for what it means to have high expectations for students. That inspired eventually the federal law changing. So in 1994, we actually saw that codified. So then every single state had to do that. So go create a system of standards and assessments. At that point in time, only had to test by grade span. And as you can imagine, implementation was very spotty because there weren't really any strings attached at the federal level. So only 29 states actually moved forward with implementing that federal law. So that led to a desire to put even more federal control in place. And that's where we saw the enactment of the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001, And at that point, it was, you need to be testing annually and reading and math. And then we saw a whole series of consequences for schools if performance was not met, not only across all student groups, but also by the individual special populations of students, right? And so this was both on academic performance and graduation rates. And that created a situation in which the goal was so high that over time, so many schools across the country started being listed as failing, right? And that became, quite frankly, a public relations nightmare. In fact, I think it was the state of Washington that first ended up with every single school in their state listed as failing. And so it put a question on the table, right? How do we begin to change this? So now we're starting to see the pendulum swing back just a little bit. So 2015, passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is where we began to see some movement at the federal level to say, okay, you can start to include additional indicators beyond just test scores and graduation rates. And, you know, we will kind of turn school improvement back over to the local, to the state and primarily local communities. You still have to identify schools, but we'll let you determine interventions. So there's some pendulum swinging, but as all of us in this room know, there are still significant concerns right now over too heavy of a federal footprint, over assessments not feeling useful, and over metrics not feeling aligned to local values. So there's a big national conversation that is underway right now about what the next move is, what the next iteration of this federal law for K-12 education needs to look like. So that gets us to the future. So where are we now and where do we want to go? So I've got one more slide that I wanted to share. There's a lot on this slide. We can use this slide as we go into small groups. You can think on it and ponder on it. What this slide represents on the left-hand side are all of the concerns that we hear consistently, whether we're in a local community, whether we're at a state level conversation, whether we're at a conversation with national organizations about our current assessment and accountability systems. On the right-hand side, these are the things that we are hearing consistently from communities about what they would rather see assessment and accountability systems look like. So it's a compare and contrast chart. And I'll just kind of walk through some of these. You will notice that they align beautifully with the core findings and tenets of the Kentucky United We Learn work. So none of this will be surprising. This will all feel very familiar. So the current system has this heavy emphasis on student academic achievement. The federal government requires us to weight, these standardized assessments so heavily in our accountability systems that nothing else matters. And what we're hearing is we would rather see more holistic indicators. Yes, we care about student outcomes, but we also care about school inputs. Remember the waterfall chat, right? There are a lot of inputs in there that we care about when we think about school quality. Edna, I'm seeing your note. This was created by KnowledgeWorks. So this was just based on all the conversations and work that we've done along the way. And we'll be sure to share the slides after if you would like to reference this. A narrow focus on core academic subjects in our current systems versus this notion of, yes, academic knowledge is important, but we want to get to skills too. Like, what are these deep transferable skills that we know are critical to success in college and career? Curriculum is too centered around test preparation, particularly as you get close to that annual testing window. We hear awful stories about 3 and 4 weeks time being reallocated around test preparation. Some of these states and communities are moving towards through course assessment. While it's giving you real-time data, it's also turning a lot more test preparation cycles into play, right? And so there's questions, I think, about how we might embed assessments more deeply into instruction and allow students to demonstrate mastery when they are ready. Just to go quickly through a few others. So instead of that top-down development of indicators for accountability systems, to federal government telling us the things we have to measure, getting to more of a reciprocal development, working with local communities to determine the values and indicators that are most meaningful to them. I'll flag, I think there's a lot of communities that are tired of these sort of top-down consequences and supports around school improvement, and more of a desire to empower communities to work together to address the growth areas, and that every school should be doing that, not just those that are labeled as the lowest performing. And I'll just flag this last one. There's growing concerns actually about the quality of our assessments out there as it relates to whether they exhibit cultural or linguistic bias, and what that is setting up as it relates to the value of data, and how we can shift and improve our assessments as tools to make sure that they are more culturally and linguistically inclusive. So I didn't go over all of them, went over a lot of them. We'll make sure you have these slides, but these are the very important sort of elements of a vision that we're hearing emerge, and that I think will track and resonate with the conversations that were happening here, and that we can use and refer back to this content as we think about the type of policy systems that we want to create. So with that, I'm going to pass to John, who is going to send us out into some small groups to think and process on something that's more anchored in Kentucky's context.
Thank you so much, Lillian. So before we go out into small groups, I just want to frame the discussion we're about to have. So I've done my best to split folks into 3 different groups that are roughly equal and have as much variety and representation as possible. So you will have Lillian, Meredith, or I joining a group, and we will be, sitting, taking notes. And then after we come back, we will have a couple of minutes to just share out any general trends or reflections that we heard. We think it would be great for each other group to hear what maybe the other groups talked about. So the breakout rooms are going to have 15 minutes to work through these 2 questions on the screen. So the first question is, as you can see, what has your experience been with these systems? And second, what isn't working well for Kentucky stakeholders impacted by these systems, or this system or these systems, depending on how you want to look at it. So I think, what we're looking for here is not expertise in the nuances of state assessment. I think the goal of this conversation is just really for, one, folks in the room to hear how are others experiencing these assessments from your unique roles. If you are a parent, how do you experience these systems? If you're a student, how do you experience these systems? If you're a community member, how do you experience these systems? And maybe the answer is you don't, and you're wondering, why don't I more? And I want to find ways that I can experience them more in more meaningful ways. So, even if the answer is no, that is something that's really important to share. So again, really encourage folks to just share their own personal experience based off of whatever your role is identified in this conversation. And we just really want to hear from you. So we will have 15 minutes. Lillian, just a quick flag. You can join group 2 because I couldn't actually assign you, and then I will join group 3. So does anyone have any questions before I open the rooms? All right, here we go. And these are set to automatically close after 15 minutes. So see you all in 15 minutes. A couple of minutes and reflect on some themes that we may have heard. So I can do a quick overview of some of the things that were brought up in our group. So I think there were really 4 themes that stood out to me as I was taking notes. We had some great reflections. The first one was that in a lot of cases that the current way that we test really doesn't serve all students, especially not only students with disabilities, but students who may have different priorities, or students that maybe just struggle with testing. So that's I think, as a couple folks put it, Jim put it very well. It tries to, assign 2 different shapes to kids on a pegboard when kids come in many different shapes and sizes. And so, it's trying to fit every kid into a square peg or a round hole, and that's not the reality of how students come. Another related reflection was that we assess every kid in the same way through a multiple choice test, even when they're vastly different and they're going to show knowledge in very different ways. Third one was that a lot of time from our students in the group, students really don't know what the score means and they don't understand it, so therefore they don't value it. And then last but not least, and I think these are all related, but that the test really doesn't accurately reflect the knowledge that kids may or may not have because of how limited they are in the scope of what they assess. So I think I got everything. And sorry if I left anything out, folks. There were some really great deep reflections. So Lillian, do you want to go next?
Sure. Does anyone from my group want to report out? Or share some big insights, some aha moment?
And you touched on something, didn't you say it affects the workforce?
Yeah, that was just as the seconds were dribbling away. My children grew up between 1990 and now, and they are in the workforce now. And yet I feel like the school systems with the emphasis on assessment, and they tell me this, is that it didn't serve them well for some of the kinds of things that they need to know to be a team worker in their workforce. I mean, they have all learned how to do that, but I think that independently they have each said to me that, there's 4 of them, that the school was about stuffing information in and then spitting it back on a test, and it didn't really teach me the global parts of the world, of existing in a world. I think is not just, I don't mean just history and geography and that sort of thing. I mean existing in a world.
Yeah,
And I do have to say that I still live in the same county, and I think the school has really realized that, and they are working hard to overcome that through the L3 and just other things that they've been doing in the schools.
It's awesome to hear. That's a great sort of personal reflection and underscores a lot of our conversation. We also touched on the issues around timeliness and usefulness of the data. I've got a great quote that, we've gotten to a clinical place with testing. It's really become a checkbox. And then we talked about like assuming all kids are learning at the same rate in all subjects is just wrong. So we need to think differently about how our systems are set up to ensure success. And then we talked about like what's measured changes behavior. So like right now, Kentucky's accountability system values students. You get points for students in AP classes. So now everyone's pushing kids into AP classes. Well, that might not be the right path for all students. So we also touched on some accountability pieces as well.
Meredith, would you or someone from your group like to do a quick minute to 30-second reflection?
Sure, we had some great conversations, but if Marcia is willing to share, she spoke about her experience. Look at those eyes. She's like, I don't want to. About being an administrator and kind of that push and pull between what students need and what we kind of are asked to do. Anything that you want to share and kind of your reflections?
There was a lot there. I kind of went into my pain body with that prompt a little bit. So I am a parent of 4 kids in Jefferson County Public Schools. They've only been in public schools. I've only worked in public schools. My primary experience has been in CSI schools, PLA, priority, whatever we're calling, schools that are struggling these days. And I happen to be the principal at a Montessori public school in the west end of Louisville, Kentucky. And our motto here, we wouldn't put it on a shirt or on the wall or anything, but it's kind of let your freak flag fly. Like we educate everybody, we work with everybody, we support everybody. We don't have a dress code for adults or for students. We do flexible grouping and even flexible classes. We had a kid at the end of last year who was, for all intents and purposes, very, very gifted. And so the parents said, she needs something more. What should we do? And I said, well, let's promote her. They said, but she'll be in 2nd grade next year. I said, if we promote her, she'll be in 3rd grade. She's in 3rd grade. She's doing well. She's very mature and ready. We have rearranged classes, not necessarily on paper, but based on student need, because they needed to be in a space that either for socio-emotional learning needs or for specific learning needs. Like we have had kids that will travel to 3rd grade kids that go to a 5th grade classroom for math because they're ready for 5th grade. We've had, kindergartners who go to 2nd or 3rd grade for ELA because they're ready. I mean, we do those things, but we also provide very, very extensive safety net programs and socio-emotional supports for our students that come in that are really, really needing support. And so I guess I've forgotten your name. Where are you? I can't find you on the Zoom, but our moderator specifically was like, well, Dr. Montessori, what would Dr. Montessori say about testing? I don't know that Dr. Montessori would be down with the oodles of testing that we do, but I think Dr. Montessori would be okay with diagnostic assessments or universal screeners, so that gives teachers information on what the student is ready for next. But I think that, for lack of a better term, assessments in the state of Kentucky, in our county and other counties like us and dissimilar from us, assessments have been bastardized, especially the assessments that are used as universal screeners. Now, NWEA has a whole linking study on how can we predict K-Prep or KSA scores, and that has taken away all the purpose for the universal screener. It's not about predicting who's going to pass the KSA with a proficient or distinguished. It's about what do kids know right now and what are they ready to learn next, and how can we provide those supports.
Thank you. Amen.
Thank you so much. Well, we really appreciate those reflections, and thank you for engaging in these conversations with us. And for the sake of time, we'll move on, but we hope to have many similar conversations with you all as we continue these conversations in the months ahead. So Meredith, are you able to pull the slide deck back up to slide number 10? Yeah. All right, thank you so much. So before we wrap up tonight, we wanted to just take, hold on one second. Apologies, my cat had gotten stuck in the room, so I needed to let her out. So the one thing that Lillian mentioned is that we're going to be doing over the next couple of months what we call an opportunity analysis. So we want to just dig a little bit into this process, describe what it is, and give folks just kind of an idea of kind of what's coming down the pipeline and how it might be useful to you. So Meredith, if you go on to slide number 11. So before diving into this opportunity analysis, we want to give you a quick overview of what we use to do it, which is what we call our state policy framework for personalized and competency-based learning. So the state policy framework for personalized learning was something that our team developed several years ago. And if you are like us and you really, really enjoy digging into super weedy, nuanced policy stuff, I'll drop the link in the chat for you. But suffice to say that I think the summary we can give here is also probably good enough. So the state policy framework has 12 different categories organized into 4 different areas that we believe, and our experience tells us, are essential to consider from a policy standpoint when making the statewide policy shifts that are necessary to empower communities to pursue personalized learning opportunities. So you can see, again, these 12 conditions here. The 4 buckets are building capacity, empowering student learning, cultivating systems change, and ensuring quality. So normally what we do is we would dig into all 12 of these, but for our Kentucky work, we're going to be focusing on 3 of the key areas: quality frameworks, balanced assessment, and measuring success, all in the purple area. And we are also going to be taking a look at graduation requirements, since those also fold into this work very nicely. So before digging into what this process looks like, we just want to touch on kind of each of these pieces and kind of how they play out. So next slide, before engaging with assessment accountability, something else that we'll be adding into the opportunity analysis is thinking about the quality and establishing a vision for success. So, before you can reimagine a system and re-envision a system, we typically really advise states, and I think folks in this call would probably agree that you need a vision of where you want to go before you start redesigning the system. Otherwise, you're just going to end up replicating the system you already have in a slightly different form. So this is often articulated through in a personalized competence-based learning space a portrait or a profile of a learner document that is very similar to what Kentucky State Board of Education recently adopted. So this step is incredibly important, as not having that alternative vision can really not lead us to where we want to get. So from there, the next step is states will often create a aligned set of competencies that lay out in a lot more detail how students can make progress towards achieving that vision in the portrait. Now, Kentucky's not alone in taking this step. I believe Kentucky is now the 15th state, based off of a few months ago, we did a survey of this, that have created one of these documents. And we know that a number of communities have already created their own. So this is not to say that a state should be prioritized in any way, shape, or form above locally created documents, just acknowledging that, in this particular instance, that Kentucky is, one of 15 states who've created this. So we also like to spotlight often Utah and Washington, 2 states, because of their portraits, and then they've had some great structures that they've put in place to support these. So Utah specifically has been one of the really forward-thinking states, along with Kentucky, in thinking about how they can support competence-based education through things like portrait and competencies. They've built out resources, including rubrics, grant programs, and exploratory documents, as well as technical support from the State Board of Ed, which is their education department, to really help districts take advantage of these documents. And I should also shout out Lillian, because she recently engaged with a statewide effort to bring their assessment and accountability systems in line with the portrait. So I'm sure that she will be able to draw on that work for some of the time that we'll have together in the months and years to come. So once that is in place on slide 13, we can really get into the accountability piece and assessment piece. So thinking about accountability, and I won't rehash everything that Lillian said earlier, but just to recap and summarize, again, this is accountability piece can be challenging due to the federal mandates that on some level drive so much of what states have to put into their system, but on another level that states and local entities really can create some innovative structures. And while this work is very much in its infancy nationally, no one's really figured it out yet. There are some really great examples of what this can maybe start looking like. So these bullets here kind of give you an idea. And again, Lillian touched on some of these about how accountability systems can support learner-centered approaches. They can really think about making sure that inputs are as valuable as outputs. You can't make the outputs if you don't have the resources to make those things happen. Incorporating local indicators into statewide systems or what you submit to the state, really thinking about how can CBE pathways get integrated into readiness indicators. I think Lillian made a great point in acknowledging that a lot of times there's kind of a narrow focus on things like advanced placement, but less focus on broader experiences. And then thinking about how improvement systems and accreditation and other related things really feed into that system as well. So Colorado is an example that we like to point to, where they have a local accountability pilot program that allow local systems to use additional measures for indicators of student success, which ultimately the goal is for it to feed back up to the state so they can learn from innovations in the field. So just one example of another state that's doing some similar work. On the next slide, and I'll try to move through these last couple quickly since I know we're getting close on time. Assessments, very similar to accountability in that there are federal requirements that do constrain in some ways what a balanced assessment system can look like. But states do have, a lot of different options as well as local entities about what they can do. So, you can see here, these are some ways that assessment systems can align to CBE. And I won't read through all of these, but I think we'll probably provide the slides at some point in the future. But these are just, again, some ways that it can look. One state that we often like to highlight here, I already mentioned Utah and the work that Lillian had done, but New Mexico, which has created an innovative assessment community of practice that started in 2020, which brought together a number of districts across their state to really think about how could they use project-based graduation pathways, which culminated in a senior capstone project more broadly within the state. So again, another example of a great state that's doing some great work similar to Kentucky. And then last but certainly not least, we just want to touch on graduation requirements, since those are another way that you can really, on the next slide, encourage this work. So, graduation requirements, they can be constraining in terms of what students can do, what students can get credit for if they aren't expansive. But, when thought more holistically and thought about more expansively, they really can, I like to think of it as they empower things like college and career pathway opportunities to really achieve their true potential. So it's funny in thinking about examples of this, I actually usually will cite Kentucky as one of the states that has a more advanced set of graduation requirements. In that Kentucky, the first 2 years students are kind of a bit more dictated, and these are the courses, you must take these first couple of sequential courses, but there is more freedom in that personalized part the last couple of years and the types of credits and types of things that students can really get credit for. That said, there's always room for improvement and innovation. That's one of the things we're going to be digging into with the opportunity analysis. So Bismarck, North Dakota, another state we work in, is another great example where they actually have a program. It's called Empower Ed, where juniors and seniors go to the Career Academy if they choose to do so. And while they do community-based projects, they can actually earn their credit towards their English 11 or 12 credit without just sitting in an English class. So again, just another cool opportunity, another more innovative way that you can think about integrating competency-based ed more into graduation requirements. So these are all things we'll be digging into with our opportunity analysis. And a quick overview of the process on the next slide. We start by talking with the folks within the community we're working with, in this case, the Kentucky Department of Ed, about decisions with what should we be reviewing, who should we be talking to. We are in the process of completing our background research and really drafting up kind of the initial analysis with a set of recommendations. We're actually going to be interviewing a few folks later this week to really fill in any outstanding holes and questions that we have. And then, ultimate goal is to finish, design, and publish this document, which includes both an analysis of the existing policy environment as well as recommendations. Now, these are not meant to be comprehensive recommendations or saying you must do all of these things. It's more focused on, these are ideas and ways in which you could make these systems more student-centered, the assessment, accountability, graduation requirements. And goal, I think, in the long term is really to bring those to this group and other groups and engage with them and figure out what makes sense for Kentucky and which of these things might be most effectively integrated into existing systems and structures to really help folks make progress towards where they want to go. So that is my long-winded explanation of the opportunity analysis. And we did just want to pause. These are some framing questions that folks could ask, but if there are any questions, we want to make sure folks have a minute or two to pose them before we start closing things.
This is Edna. So John, you all have already gone through the state regs around assessment. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, we're actually working with some of our colleagues in organization that we often work with these opportunity analysis. They have a lot of experience really digging into state regs. So it's kind of a joint project, but that initial kind of review it has been completed, and now we're in the process of doing the write-up of those pieces.
Okay. And then that will be shared with us. And you said there was an analysis of it. Are we going to further analyze or?
Oh yeah, definitely. This is just the starting process. So,
Okay.
And not saying we would necessarily do this. I think part of it is up to a particular state and what makes sense. But in the last state we did an opportunity analysis with, we then engaged in a whole action planning process where we went through each of the recs and said, okay, which of these things should we do? What's the right scope and sequence of them? Are there other ones that are needed? Did we miss things? Are there things that don't need to be in here? So it's very much a starting point, Edna, to help people kind of get an idea of where might we want to start, where might you want to start with this work.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And if I didn't say it, the goal is to have this completed before the April convenings. That is what we'll be working for. Lillian, do you want to add anything while we're waiting for any other questions to come in?
Yeah, I think I saw a chat come in. My chat is only showing up every other, so it's there and then it disappears. So if this is weird, I'm sorry. But I think I saw a question about what resource we're referencing. So just wanted to be clear. So when the standing committee met in November, remember the big, hairy, audacious goal that you guys came up with was a deep desire to analyze and more deeply understand what Kentucky's current policy environment is as it relates to assessment and accountability and graduation requirements, which upon further reflection aligns very nicely with tools and resources that KnowledgeWorks has built and has used in other states. And so why not deploy it here, right? So this is our kind of next steps, is to bring that process into play to support the big, hairy, audacious goal for this committee. And so the resource will be, an opportunity analysis prepared for Kentucky, for each of you to get your eyes on first, and then to use that as a tool to help you as you then go through a series of exercises to come up with your own priorities and action plans to move forward.
Thank you so much for explaining that there. I actually do have a question, but I also have a thought I'd like to share first. So I keep having to remind myself that this is a multi-year process, that this is not going to happen overnight. And as someone who is super excited to see the change happen, that can be a bit frustrating, but it's also reassuring to know that we have time to make sure we do our best to get things right. With that said, I'm a very action-oriented person. I know we talked about that in November, and I know that many of our members are also action-oriented people. So I'm curious to know, as we anticipate our next meeting, as we look forward to April in person, what can we be doing as members of this group to remain involved? What are your thoughts surrounding that action that we might be able to help take part in?
Yeah, that's a great one. I'll jump in, and then Meredith, please chime in as well. And Caleb, love that you're going to be the chair here, because you're going to really push us, which I love so much. So I think part of the work that this group needs to do is to actually build out the policy agenda, right? So I think that the state has done an incredible job on the vision, and really centering that in the needs and desires of local communities through the Kentucky United We Learn report. I think that our policymakers in Kentucky are still asking, okay, so what do I do? How can I support this effort? And some aren't even aware of it, right? Or no, maybe have heard it mentioned, but aren't really sure what it is. And so the first step is to actually create an informed, evidence-based, policy agenda. And the second part of that, and I should say, in the opportunity analysis is going to help us do that. Then the second part of it is, okay, now how do we move that policy agenda to action? So that's where some of that rich conversation that we started in November is going to come to life around, who do we know? Who do we start carrying that message forward to, right? What are the communications materials that we might need to be able to effectively communicate this type of change, So it really is, sometimes it's going to be storytelling work. And so we'll talk about in an upcoming meeting some of the advocacy components that we're going to want to build into this as well. But certainly appreciate that and know that as soon as we get those resources ready, we're going to get into the hard work of figuring out what we want for Kentucky. Meredith, I don't know if you want to add anything from KDE's perspective. Maybe not. Did we lose her?
I apologize. Zoom is really giving me all the troubles today. I apologize. No, I think that you've summarized it well. This is the long race. We are running the marathon, Caleb, and I know that that's hard. But I think the important thing throughout this process is that we are identifying and culling and focusing, and that's what the purpose of the Cool Council is, to really serve as that body to sort of pull recommendations, review, and bring them forward to the commissioner and the board. So I think that is we're on the right track. But I do think that making sure that we are getting information to the decision makers that's why we started the meeting talking about that, how important it is to make sure that we get our legislators involved and supportive. So I saw Bentley, are you talking points? I'm sorry here, the LRC to help with, can you explain a little bit more? I'm sorry.
I don't know if we could reach out to the LRC and effectively ask for a full-blown package of all of the education statutes.
We can, they don't really work for us. So they probably could help us. We don't really, we would have to frame our question carefully and exactly what we were asking for. And obviously right now they are in session. And so they work for the legislature and they have lots of research they're doing right now to make sure that all the bills are drafted and supported. So, but no, that, you know, we do have tools available to us to make sure that we have all the information. I apologize, my chat is also malfunctioning, Lillian, so I'm getting messages here delayed. I don't know, Microsoft Teams maybe isn't so bad. It certainly works better for me. Let's see, that are being examined. So John, is there any information about kind of where you are right now with the opportunity analysis that could be shared with the group, maybe in an email that we could kind of give them sort of at least some additional information in the interim while it's still being drafted?
Edna, I saw you just come off mute there. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, what I was just asking if I mean, I know, could we just get the chapters of the KRS that you're looking at so we could start reading them ourselves and sort of, because that can be kind of tedious reading and it could be helpful if we had sort of our head wrapped around what's in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So, and Meredith, I can give a quick verbal update. So this week, the latter part of this week, we're going to be doing some interviews, as I mentioned, on Wednesday and Friday to fill in some of those last holes that maybe we couldn't answer just by viewing written documents. And then our writers are going to be drafting everything up, and we'll start kind of reviewing the next round of the draft on Friday of next week. So I think once we've gotten that verbal feedback, at some point not too long after that, it wouldn't be, I think, a terrible lift on our end to try to put something like that together. So possibly maybe middle of February, which I think would still give folks a good kind of runway, if that is a desire of folks, before we get to the April convening, to really kind of dig into some of those statutory pieces. So that would be kind of my update and my thoughts. Willing to, of course, entertain other thoughts or suggestions folks may have.
And I do have a sort of set of resources that the Office of Assessment and Accountability pulled together about the current accountability system with some links and documents that have been shared with other groups that we can push out as well. So I apologize, I'm sort of losing the thread here and what our focus is. Is it really in what are the statutes that and regulations that are being reviewed for the opportunity analysis, or how we want to kind of think about proposed amendments moving forward and sort of onboarding decision makers in that process? So I apologize if I'm not answering the right question here. So someone
No,
could.
I'm just asking for, I mean, I could go in and do a search and say education.
Gotcha.
But then I'm going to get a whole mess of stuff.
Yes,
that-
yes,
that
yes.
I don't know which ones you're actually looking at. And then my other question is around the talking points, and then at what point are we planning? I know it's in the first 6 months, but I'd kind of like to, I want to be able to bring something back to our L3 to talk about what we're doing here. And so I don't know.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, good. So those are the two things I thought we were talking about. So I think that the list of talking points will evolve. Part of the meeting that we're going to have actually on Wednesday with the chairs of the other standing committees will be sort of making sure that the action items from each standing committee are being captured, shared across the committees, and that we are honing our message to make sure that we're really capturing the advancement of the work. So that will evolve, right? So our talking points, especially as we start to have a clearer message. I will share tonight the links from OAA. I think that will help because that's going to be a lot around assessment and accountability. So I think that'll be a good place to start. And then John, if you can just cross-reference, and if there's anything glaring missing from what has been shared, then maybe you could pass that along to the group so that there are some additional things that they can be looking into before our next meeting. Okay, awesome. All right. John, anything else you want to share about the opportunity analysis? We're excited.
No, and if folks have any follow-up questions, more than happy to respond via email. My typing my email address into the chat right now, so feel free to shoot me a note if anything pops up after the fact tonight. But Meredith, I'll pass it off to you for updates and closing then.
Awesome. Okay, so we have 2 tasks and we are very close to our 90-minute goal. So we're going to be quick here. So I do want to make sure that we take a vote on our charter, and would propose we do this by way of a little attendance taking, because we do have some members that are here that aren't on my list. And so I want to make sure I capture everyone's names. So if you could go back, and I can see if I can share the link again. We've had a little bit of time with our meeting to add some more notes to the charter. So if everyone can take a look at that proposal, and if you are good with the draft as it stands, and certainly this document can evolve as well, and we can revisit it in the future, but if you are good with it, if you could type approved in the chat, that way then I can capture everyone's vote and make sure that we keep track of everyone who was in attendance tonight. And then I appreciate everyone completing the doodle poll. It does look like February 13th is in the lead for our next meeting. If you have not done the doodle poll yet and would like to weigh in on your availability, please do that. And then we will assess and send out that invite. But one thing that we wanted to sort of make sure we embed in every meeting is an opportunity for member sharing. Since we are kind of at time, we might just ask one person who wants to share something that they're doing that's related to the Cool Council out in their community. So is there anything that you want to share after the convening? You probably had a lot of thoughts rattling around, and you probably applied some of that into your work. Is there anything anyone would want to share in a celebratory fashion about their community and their engagement with United We Learn?
Meredith, I can I'll mention that at our superintendent's conference, we had all of the deeper learning teams from across Kentucky at all the 8 educational cooperatives there. And then we also had the folks from PBL Works that led our sessions around leadership for personalized deep learning for Kentucky's school superintendents. And it was a great conference, and many of our districts that are deep into this work, were co-presenting in those breakout sessions, and just another step forward for what the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents is trying to do to gain more traction on this. I was really pleased with the conference, and I think our participants were too.
Thank you, Dr. Flynn. That is a great note. And we saw some good conversation on social media after your conference too. I know that Chair Young participated, and there was a lot of conversation. So we appreciate you sharing about United We Learn in that capacity. All right, so I think that, let me confirm with my agenda here that we have gone through all of the items. Yes, so likely February 13th, but expect quite a few emails from us in the days ahead as we share some resources. I will send out that information from the Office of Assessment and Accountability this evening. Look to likely meet on February 13th, but don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And congratulations again to Caleb and Bentley for their newfound responsibilities and additional connection to this work. We're thrilled to have them, and thank you all for spending the evening with us.